Hello, welcome to my presentation, Elevate Your Energy Nutrition at Altitude. I'm Jen Sommer-Dirks, Healthspan Nutritionist. This is actually a picture of me and my husband on top of Mount Sherman, which is one of Colorado's 14ers. And I have done 34 of them, 34 of the peaks. And with repeats, I started repeating them, training for the Pikes Peak Ascent. I can't even count. I think I calculated I've done close to like 70 summits. So I have spent a lot of time at altitude kind of figuring out what works and what doesn't work for nutrition. So here's what I've learned. But to back up a little bit, you do want to make sure that your daily nutrition supports your activity level. It's not enough to just eat well on the day of the event. You want to make sure that you're properly nourishing yourself on a daily basis leading up to any event. So this is a little summary of just like what are the goals of nutrition when it comes to exercise. Well, our goals are to meet nutrition needs for repair, right? We need to repair our muscles after exercise. That's where protein comes in. We want to minimize any oxidative damage. Although exercise is good for us, it does cause oxidative damage, and we need those micronutrients and antioxidants from vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients to help fight that. We want to maximize our glycogen stores for exercise and for recovery. That's going to be one of our fuel sources, especially during endurance exercise. So that's why we need the carbs around exercise. We want to make sure we're rehydrating ourselves, so getting enough fluids and electrolytes. And then back to the daily nutrition, we want to make sure we're eating enough to stay in energy balance. We want to make sure we're eating enough to support our resting metabolic rate and our overall health. And then obviously nutrition for exercise is that fueling during the actual event. So let's talk a little bit about your pre-exercise meal or snack. So it's best to have a balanced meal that has protein and carbohydrates, but before early morning adventures, it's not always possible. So you have to kind of think of the timing of it anywhere from 1 to 3 hours before your event. The closer to the event you are, the more you're probably going to focus on carbohydrates because those are easier to digest. But generally speaking, before an endurance event, high carb, moderate protein, low fat and fiber if you're worried about GI distress. Those are the two things that can cause GI issues, especially if you're going to be pushing hard at altitude. If you're going to be going slower, it's not as much of a concern. The post-exercise meal or snack, you really want to make sure that you're refueling shortly after, ideally within 30 to 45 minutes. That's like the optimal window where your body's going to recover the most efficiently, but it's really as soon as possible. Have another high carb, moderate protein snack, and this is going to help maximize recovery and energy for the rest of the day. For the nutrition during exercise, there's a few things to keep in mind. One, carbs are king at high intensities and at altitude, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. For endurance exercise in general, I recommend anywhere from 30 to 90 grams of carbs, 30 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. You're going to be on the higher end if you're like pushing really hard doing ultra endurance events. If you're going more of an easy pace, zone 2, you might be on the lower end of that. You can also look at this as in terms of calories instead of grams of carbs. And generally, I recommend 150 to 250 calories per hour, with the majority of those coming from carbohydrates. And this is in addition to your regular meals. It's important to note for things like climbing a 14er, you are going to be out for multiple hours and you very well may be hiking through lunch. So you need to factor that in, that you're eating something that counts for your lunch too, in addition to like your calories per hour goal. It's good to point out that you can train your gut, right? If you think like, oh, I can't tolerate eating when I exercise, you can, but you sometimes have to start out slow with simple carbs and slowly progress to more complex foods and larger amounts of foods. You can train your gut just like you train any other muscle in your body, but it does take time. And then in terms of real food versus sports nutrition products, it's mostly going to come down to what you prefer, I guess. In terms of that, in terms of like digestion or convenience. So for people that are running at altitude, it's really hard to like chew a handful of nuts when you're running at altitude, right? But if you're hiking at a moderate pace, that's totally doable. So I think the sports nutrition products have their place if you're going to be pushing intensities and you know it's hard to digest when you're pushing hard, but real food is great if you're going to be going at a lower intensity. You do want to make sure you have moderate amounts of protein and fat for satiety and for stable energy and stable blood sugars for all day adventures, especially at lower energies or lower intensities. Here's some ideas of hiking snacks. So kind of a mix of stuff. On the left, I have more of the carbohydrate based, and on the right is going to be more of your protein based. So I won't read the list, but just to give you some examples to kind of start thinking, it's good to have a wide variety of things, to have a mix of macros, a mix of flavors, bring foods that you enjoy. that you're going to look forward to eating, because appetite is usually suppressed during exercise and at altitude. You might not really feel like eating. So it's important to bring foods that are palatable to you. If you bring something because someone told you to bring it and you don't really like it, it's going to be a lot harder to eat it, and you're not going to have good energy if you're not able to eat it. So bring foods that you like to eat is one of the most important things to consider. And you don't want to forget about hydration either. So in terms of sports drinks versus water, my general recommendation is if you're doing an activity that's 45 to 60 minutes or less, plain water is fine. Obviously, for something like climbing a 14er, you are going to be out there for over an hour, so you do need to bring electrolytes. And I generally recommend 300 to 500 milligrams of sodium per every 16 to 20 ounces of fluids. And that could be from something like, I sometimes use Noon tabs. They're just sodium. They don't have carbs or anything in them. Pop them in your water bottle. They're very portable, so you could bring extra ones if you needed to like have more during the day. Or you could do a product like Scratch Labs that has a little bit of carbohydrate as well. That can be helpful too if you have a hard time eating when you're exercising, to have some liquid carbohydrates. They can be easier to digest. Key thing is, don't wait until you're thirsty. You're already starting to get dehydrated. If you're waiting till then, you need to be drinking regularly. So I think I mentioned this later in the presentation, but think about like where your water is when you're hiking and make sure it's easy for you to access. If it's somewhere where you have to like dig into the bottom of your pack to find your water bottle, you're going to be less motivated to do it. So keep your water where you can take drinks frequently. So a little bit about what happens at altitude specifically. So thinner air, right? Your body is working harder to make more red blood cells, and this places more stress on the body and can decrease your immune system. Also, with the thinner air, less oxygen in the air, the body relies more on anaerobic metabolism, which is without oxygen, and this system relies heavily on carbs. That's why I mentioned the carbs sooner, is that your body actually burns more carbohydrate at altitude compared to like sea level exercise. There's a lower humidity index. The drier air at altitude means increased fluid needs. And then just increased metabolism and energy needs. Your body is basically working harder to do everything at altitude. So everything feels a little bit harder. Everything is more taxing on your body. Everything burns more calories, meaning that you might need to eat more than if you were exercising at a lower altitude. It is good to know your iron status going into something at high altitude, which luckily in Healthspan, you've already checked that. So make sure that you have adequate iron stores before going into it. Some other considerations, so back to the iron topic, is include iron-rich foods leading up to the event. You just want to make sure you got plenty of iron, your body's able to make those extra red blood cells. So like beef product, oysters if you like those, beans and lentils, tofu, fortified cereals, just make sure you're getting your iron foods. And you also want to make sure you're eating to support your immune system leading up to the event, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Plan to bring along high carb snacks, since we talked about you're going to be burning more carbohydrates. So think dried fruit, could be like fig bars, pretzels, a good old PB&J. Just get some carbohydrates for energy, and then really stay on top of hydration, making sure you have those electrolytes and make the water easy to access. Other considerations at altitude is nausea is common. A lot of people's stomachs don't feel good at altitude, especially if you're kind of trying to work out hard. So I like to bring little ginger chews to suck on if my stomach starts to feel yucky. Peppermint Tums can be helpful. Anything peppermint or ginger can help with nausea. Bring palatable, easy to digest foods. So again, bring foods that sound good to you, not something that you feel like you're kind of having to choke it down. Think things that are easy to digest. So sometimes those simple carbs are easier to digest, and liquid calories can be better tolerated as well, like the Scratch Labs or something like that if you're having a hard time keeping food down due to nausea. Consider it's going to be a long day, right? You're going to be out there for a while. Bring something that counts as an actual lunch in addition to all of your snacks, and bring more than you think you need, because it's better to have more and not need it than not have enough food and have poor energy or not be able to finish. Bring portable snacks that you can eat while you're moving. So there is a rule when climbing 14ers, you should be off the summit by noon if you can, and that is to avoid the thunderstorms that sometimes come really fast in the afternoon. So for safety's sake, you don't want to be taking a ton of stopping breaks. So think about snacks that are portable. You can grab them. Maybe you can eat as you're moving. Have them like in your pockets where you can grab them. Again, you don't have to take your pack off and be digging in the bottom to find stuff. Make it easily accessible. And then just bring a variety of sweet and savory snacks to avoid that flavor fatigue. So if one thing isn't sounding good, hopefully you have something else that maybe sounds a little bit better, since your appetite will probably be blunted. And then just a little bit on nutrition for the immune system. As I mentioned, that you want to make sure you have a good immune system going into it, since exercising at altitude is taxing. And I just like this picture. I thought it was a really cute sandwich, so maybe that's something you bring for like your sandwich on the hike. But things that help our immune system, so vitamin C, think strawberries, citrus, bell peppers, vitamin A from like your orange foods, sweet potato, carrots, cantaloupe, vitamin D, which you get from the sun, but also egg yolks. Some foods are fortified with it. Zinc from pumpkin seeds, cashews, even dark chocolate, and then your probiotics from like fermented foods and yogurt. So make sure you're eating plenty of those leading up to the event so that your immune system is in a good spot. And just a quick summary overall. So just make sure your daily nutrition supports your activity level. Be well fueled going into the event. Practice your fueling and hydration strategies before the event. You want to know what food works for you, what do you like. So practice on hikes or other activities before so that you don't have to try something new on the day of the event. That's usually a risky thing. Eat for immune system report and keeping your iron stores filled leading up to the event, and just have fun.